All right, welcome back to the Leader Link podcast. This is your host, Charles Heasley. And today we're going to continue in our first mini series on some essential skills that leaders are never really taught in the workplace, but that are so important. The first one we covered last week was listening. Went deep into that. Check it out if you haven't already. The one we're going to talk about today is feedback. And a lot of people mistake how to use feedback, when to use feedback, why feedback is important. And so we're gonna break that down today. When you avoid feedback, whether that's positive feedback or whether that's corrective feedback, constructive feedback, also known as hard conversations, you end up setting yourself up for bigger problems in the future. My dear friend Courtney Ramsey has a great phrase that says, stop hitting snooze. And basically the idea is waiting to have that hard conversation is doing nobody any favors. So I'll tell you a brief story. When I was a police officer, I was not a sergeant yet. One of my jobs was to train new police officers. We call that a field training officer. Basically, you're introducing somebody who has been through the academy, you're introducing them to life on the street and what it actually looks like. And I had decided to take the sergeant's test. I'd only been with my agency for a couple of years. I moved from a different agency. I had about 5 years of experience at this time. And somebody gave me the advice. They said, if you want to promote one day, it wouldn't hurt to take the sergeant's test just so you know what it's like when you're ready. Well, I took the test and I accidentally did well enough on it that it was going to be certain that I was going to promote to sergeant. And at the time I had a recruit. I was training somebody at the time, and I wasn't apparently very aware of how I was being perceived by others in the department. And my field training officer sergeant gave me some feedback that shook me really to the core and made me really rethink my life as a leader. And I would consider this a difficult conversation, but it really transformed my leadership and it transformed how I looked at leadership. And the feedback was that people were afraid to work for me. And I was devastated by that because I didn't want to be some sort of tyrant. I wanted to be a leader. I didn't even want to be a boss. I wanted to be a leader, somebody people wanted to follow. Now, unfortunately, the conversation also included, and because of this, we would like you to step down as a field training officer. I haven't told that story very often. Well, that was devastating too, because up until that point, I had no idea that I was doing anything wrong. I had no idea that I was being perceived as somebody who is too stern or sometimes I have a flat affect on my face, and it has nothing to do with me being angry or anything. It's just that sometimes I'm thinking and I don't necessarily realize what my body language is communicating. But the reason this was a problem is because one of the goals of feedback, specifically corrective feedback, also known as hard conversations, is to give people an opportunity to improve. Had I been given that opportunity to improve and become more self-aware and seek to approach situations a little bit differently, had I been given that opportunity, who knows what could have happened? But I wasn't given that opportunity. I was told people are afraid, and that's that, and we're not going to give you any more recruits. So that was a devastating experience in my life, but it was a foundational because it really made me want to be the best leader that I could be, and it put me on a course where I became a lifelong student of leadership, and the rest is history. All right, so let's give you some practical tips. Let's talk about first, real quick, why does feedback fail? And let's just talk about hard conversations for a moment. Hard conversations are hard for a lot of reasons. Typically, somebody needs to be held accountable. The conversation is uncomfortable for both the leader and the person receiving feedback. They're hard because emotions are involved. We could be feeling anger, sadness, frustration, all these different things. And when people become emotionally triggered, then the conversation can turn from a corrective conversation easily into a negative feedback conversation. Another reason why feedback fails sometimes is because we don't do it in the proper timing. If you wait too long, uh, then people don't necessarily associate the feedback with what the actual situation was. Another reason why timing is an issue is because if if the only time you ever give feedback is when it's corrective feedback, a hard conversation about performance issues or anything like that, then people will shut down. People will be afraid to have the conversation with you, and they will actively work against, uh, not necessarily work against you, but they will work against what excellence really is, because in their mind, they'll be thinking, I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm going to do what I know is the bare minimum that is going to basically keep the leader off my back today. Another reason why feedback can fail is sometimes we use the wrong tone. We fail to take into consideration that conversation is much more than words. It is about body language, it's about facial expressions, it's about the tone of voice, and this is the feedback that I needed earlier that I didn't get. Sometimes feedback fails because there's a lack of trust. That goes with when the only time you give feedback is when there's a problem. No, we need to be giving feedback on a regular basis, and it needs to be mostly positive. On that note, a lot of people like to talk about the feedback sandwich, right? I'm going to give you some good feedback, then I'm going to give you some corrective feedback, and then I'm going to give you more good feedback. Most of the time, this leaves people confused because they don't know what to focus on. Am I doing a good job, or do I need to fix this thing? I don't know where I fully stand. Some people will only focus on the negative, some people will only focus on the positive. It doesn't accomplish what we think it accomplishes. From a leader's perspective, it's easier because I can soften the conversation, give you the feedback that I'm really here to give you, and then we can be friends again. And it just doesn't work that way. One of the biggest reasons why feedback fails is because we don't plan for it. Planning for feedback doesn't necessarily need to be super complicated, but it's essentially that we make sure that we do everything we can to acknowledge what potential emotions will be going on, what potential responses the employees will have, and to make sure that the impact of the conversation matches our intent. So there's this concept of the emotional bank account. For those of you who have read Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, you'll remember this. And basically, as a leader, we have the opportunity to make deposits into this emotional bank account. And there's going to be times where we need to make withdrawals from this emotional bank account. Well, two ways that we make withdrawals, whether we realize it or not. The first one is not giving enough feedback, inadequate levels of feedback. This is probably the most common kind of feedback that exists in the workplace. People do a good job, and instead of saying, hey, great work, in our mind, we're thinking that's what they get paid to do. So why would we need to say anything? No feedback tends to result in some resentment, and it can also result in less productivity because people are like, well, if I'm not being appreciated, then I'll just do the bare minimum and they're not actually actively saying that, but that's what's happening. The second kind of feedback that takes a withdrawal from the bank account is any kind of damaging feedback. And this is, yelling, profanity, which unfortunately in some cases still exists. This could be sarcasm in some cases. I mean, I had a leader who led with sarcasm. It didn't make me want to be around him or go to him, knowing that everything I approached him with was going to be dealt with sarcastically. Any kind of put down or anything that's directed towards character and not addressing behavior, that can be damaging feedback. Those damaging feedback and a lack of feedback, those take withdrawals from that emotional bank account. The key is we got to fill that emotional bank account. And one of the best ways to do that is to give supportive feedback. This is feedback that says, good job, keep going, you're doing great. We need to make it specific, we need to make it timely, and we need to make sure that we're doing more supportive feedback so that we can gain that trust. And when we come to the person with a hard conversation to address some sort of accountability issue or behavior issue, they will know that we actually care about them and do want them to succeed because we're pouring into that relationship on a regular basis. Interestingly, corrective feedback, hard conversations, those are actually an investment into the emotional bank account, where supportive feedback that says keep going is an investment. Corrective feedback says keep growing. It means I genuinely care about you. I care about your success. I want you to succeed in this organization, at your role, progress. And in order to do that, I want to share with you because I believe in you. Imagine if my FTO sergeant, my field training officer sergeant, had poured into me like that when the issues first started to be discussed. I could have had the opportunity to grow. Keep going, keep growing, pour into that emotional bank account. Here's some general tips. Timing is critical. We got to make sure that the feedback is done soon after the act so people can associate it with the act that happened, whatever behavior. If you have to give corrective feedback, if it has to be some sort of hard conversation, plan for it. Plan for what are the potential reactions, what are the potential emotions, how might I be potentially triggered, what is the specific behavior that I want to correct, all those things. Just make a plan, and we have tools for that. But make a plan. If you're involved, another tip is if you're involved in any kind of damaging feedback, or if you're not giving enough feedback, stop it. The damaging feedback has no place in business or in any relationship, really. And a lack of feedback, inadequate feedback, the most common kind, it's not doing your organization any good. I can promise you that. The last tip on there is increase positive feedback. There was I believe a Harvard Business Review study or article published in 2013 where it said that the ratio of positive feedback to corrective feedback needed to be 5.6 positive feedback to every 1 corrective feedback. Now, I don't know how you give 0.6 feedback, but the idea is more. Just give more of it so that when you do need to make corrective feedback or have those hard conversations, people are much more willing to receive it. All right, here's some bonus. While leaders and people in general are not taught how to give feedback, they're also not taught how to receive feedback. Look, not everyone is good at giving feedback, and these situations can be a little emotionally charged. So here's just a few tips on how to receive feedback. Number 1, ask questions. It is a lot of times people will make assumptions about the causes of people's behavior or the intent behind people's behavior. So ask questions. Number 2, don't argue. This is not the time to argue. Let them finish talking. Ask your questions. When they're done, say thank you for sharing that with me because it was probably hard for them to do. And then go back and reflect on it. And then you can decide, was it good feedback? Was it not good feedback? But in the moment is not the time to argue. All right, your challenge for this week. Somebody on your team, I want you to catch them doing something right and then say, thank you for doing XYZ. I appreciate it. All right, we'll see you next Tuesday for the last installment of this mini series. Have a good one, and we'll see you next week.